Good morning, Scotland. Good morning, social media land. I hope you're well. It is Wednesday, the 16th of October, 2024. Scotland generates billions in revenue, but only a fraction of it directly benefits its people. Westminster collects most of Scotland's wealth and decides how it's spent. Meanwhile, hidden expenses and UK-wide projects are charged to Scotland despite of offering little direct benefit. If Scotland controlled her own finances, she could run a surplus and reinvest in her own infrastructure. We're going to examine this today and discover the eye-watering truth behind Scotland's wealth. Scotland's position within the United Kingdom, particularly in terms of revenue generation and expenditure, raises critical questions about its economic future. At the heart of the debate is whether Scotland is truly benefiting from the Union, or if the structure imposed by Westminster leaves the country worse off. By examining Scotland's revenue streams and the spending that the Union attributes to it, the picture becomes clearer. The Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland GERs report is often used to depict Scotland's fiscal state as unsustainable and unmanageable. However, a closer look shows that Scotland's fiscal reality is far more complex than it appears on paper. If Scotland were to retain control over all of its revenue streams without the burden of UK-wide expenditures, it would likely operate with a surplus and be in a stronger economic position as an independent nation. Within the Union, Scotland generates approximately about £88.5 billion a year. This includes contributions from oil, gas, VAT and devolved taxes like income tax. Yet despite this substantial revenue, only £41 billion is returned to Scotland through the block grant, which funds devolved areas such as healthcare, education, transport and housing. This block grant is essential to running these critical services, but it's not the full picture. The remaining £47.5 billion goes directly to the UK Treasury, which allocates it to UK-wide expenses. These are expenditures that often do not directly benefit Scotland. Among them is defence spending, where £3.2 billion is allocated to Scotland. But much of that supports our nuclear weapons and military operations outside of Scotland, with only around about £1.9 billion being spent in Scotland itself. Additionally, Scotland is charged £4 billion annually to service the UK's national debt, even though borrowing decisions are made in Westminster. And bear in mind that Scotland cannot borrow in the traditional way that normal independent nations can. On top of that, Scotland contributes to UK-wide infrastructure projects like HS2, which predominantly benefits England and not Scotland. The imbalance becomes even more stark when you start to consider non-identifiable expenditures. Non-identifiable expenditures? What the hell are they? They are expenditures that can't, be identified. That sounds like cowboy economics to me. These are the costs that the UK government incurs on behalf of the entire Union, but cannot directly attribute it to any specific area like Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. Examples of non-identifiable spending include defence in the form of foreign operations, national security, foreign affairs, public debt servicing, the administration of UK-wide government services like His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and foreign aid to the likes of Ukraine and Israel. The issue with non-identifiable expenditures is that they inflate Scotland's alleged deficit, a deficit that Scotland herself has no say in generating or actually deciding on how to spend. While the costs are shared across the UK, they do not directly benefit Scotland's infrastructure or public services. The GERs report consistently shows Scotland running around about a £22.7 billion fiscal deficit, but this figure is heavily influenced by these non-identifiable expenditures, which are decided and managed by Westminster. The GERs report frequently used as an argument against Scottish independence, portraying the country as financially unsustainable within the Union. But this argument fails to recognise the real impact of Westminster's spending decisions. The report measures Scotland's fiscal balance within the UK framework, meaning Scotland is financially burdened by spending over which it has no control. The deficit shown in GERs is not relative to how Scotland's finances would look if it had full control over its revenue and spending. When these non-identifiable expenditures are removed, the fiscal picture changes dramatically. If Scotland retained all of its revenue streams and eliminated the spending currently attributed by Westminster, it would have far greater controls over its finances. With 88.5 billion total revenue and the ability to remove the UK-wide costs such as defence and debt servicing, Scotland's actual spending would be significantly lower. For instance, Scotland could opt for a similar defence budget of around 2 billion, aligning its military spending with countries like Denmark and Norway, who have similar population size and strategical interests. Likewise, Scotland could reduce its debt servicing costs to potentially $1 billion, or nothing at all, as we don't actually have any borrowing in place right now. Any debt the Union tries to force upon us can be argued away simply under international law. With social security obligations and our own version of non-identifiable expenditure with our foreign policy, spending potentially will remain around 30 billion for both. Devolved spending on healthcare, education, transport and housing would also remain around about 41 billion. So Scotland's total expenditure could drop to around 74 to 77 billion pounds. By retaining its entire revenue and removing the burden of UK-wide spending, Scotland would be able to operate with a fiscal surplus. If you subtract the adjusted spending from revenue, Scotland would expect a surplus of between 11.5 to 14.5 billion pounds. This surplus could easily be reinvested into key areas such as renewable energy infrastructure and public services, allowing Scotland to pursue its own economic priorities without having to account for UK-wide commitments that do not directly benefit our country. Right then, let's sum up. Scotland's fiscal position within the Union is categorised by a deficit directly caused by the UK-wide spending decisions that do not affect Scotland's needs or priorities. The GERs report, while often used to highlight Scotland's fiscal challenges, merely reflects the financial situation within the Union and does not consider the financial landscape Scotland would face if it controlled its own resources. If Scotland were independent, retaining all of its revenue streams and eliminating unnecessary UK-wide spending, it would likely operate with a significant fiscal surplus. This would allow Scotland to reinvest in its future and manage its economy in a way that aligns with the needs of its population, demonstrating that independence could lead to a stronger, more sustainable economic future. Scotland is a wealthy nation, and that's not what's in question. What is in question is who has overall control of this wealth, and it's certainly not Scotland herself. Tomorrow we will take what we have learned for the past 3 days and discuss the economic potential of Scotland. Should we have our own currency? Would it be trusted? And how about that foreign investment thing? How do we encourage that then? Listen, I hope to see you there. Until then, have a great day.
I can't get no sleep.